Hi, Deb.
People will, Jules, I know you're probably feeling frazzled, but we'll all find it.
I just feel very disappointed.
We'll figure it out.
I feel disappointed for Jacqui and for us.
I know.
But anyway.
Jules, I'm not disappointed, so don't stress. I like us. I like a small group.
It's nice to have a small group.
You know what? Whatever the universe tells us is meant to be, that's what they will provide. So whoever is meant to be here will be here.
It's hard when you're a control freak, though.
All right. Well, I never thought I was until now, but I obviously am.
It comes with the territory.
Okay. And Jean says it is easy to get in via Zoom. Okay, so Jacqui, over to you. I suggest everybody puts it onto speaker view in the top right. And for some reason, Carol, you come up when I'm talking. That's interesting. Anyway, it's all recording. Off we go.
We are here. So good morning, ladies. Oh, it's afternoon now, and it's 12:12. See, whoever's meant to be here is here. I'm absolutely thrilled this morning to be here with all of you, and so thank you so much for giving me your time and sharing your time with us. Today is a little probably less structured because it's a nice open round kind of conversation. What Jules and I wanted to focus on, excuse me, I have got a little bit of a cold, and so it's coming through a bit. What Jules and I wanted to focus on is more around breaking through the gender bias lens when it comes to raising funds and raising capital. My background, and before I actually go into that, I'd love just a show of hands. Has anyone here actually needed to go and raise capital or looking to raise capital?
Yes.
Other than Jules?
I have a client who's wanting to raise capital, two of them actually.
Yeah.
And down the track.
Okay. And so what would, actually, this is probably an even better question. What would you like to get out of today's conversation? What are you hoping to hear or get from this conversation so that I can tailor it more towards your needs?
I think to get a really good overview, Jacqui, like I looked at or considered like an angel investor or something along those lines a couple of years ago for my perfume business.
Yep.
And it's massive, it's overwhelming, you sort of don't know where to start. I think if you're in the tech world or you've got a tech product, it's probably more appealing, and I feel like that's where a lot of the investment goes to. So if you're not in that space, how do we even go about it, and what's possible and what's viable, you know?
Yeah, they're all they're all fair questions. They're all very common things that people come up against, not just women, but everyone comes up against when they start looking into the investment space. So Karen,
what are they looking for? What do they want from the person pitching to make a decision?
Yep. Okay. Great. Jenny, how are you? Sorry, I haven't had a chance to say hi to you yet either.
We need to catch up.
We do. How are you, Jenny? Congratulations on the launch of your gig as well.
Yeah, thank you. Eventually I'll be looking for impact investors as opposed to just investors, which is obviously my background in mainstream funds management, but people that are aligned with the values and what we're doing and willing to put impact before anything else.
Okay, great. And Jean?
Yeah, not for me, but for my clients, I just put my hand down. It's what's, like Jane said, but what's the actual detail of the process? You know, the first 10 things they need to do to go through the whole process. For someone who's never applied for funding before, you know, the top 10 things that you need to do, and on top of what everybody else has said as well. It's like, well, where do you start on all this craziness? And it's about the best, and also a list of, you know, who are the best people to go to for their particular area as well. I mean, that's the big thing. I work with female entrepreneurs who run their own business, but some are looking for funding, a bit like Jules is doing as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. They're all great questions, and I'm so glad I asked this because it's a completely different presentation to the one that I was planning to do. So what I'm going to do is, is really just tailor this as a conversation to answer and go through all of those questions. My slides are probably not as relevant. There is one though, and this is one that I will probably start with. And then I'll go through and talk about process, where to start, and who to talk to, how to go around funding, and what investors are potentially looking for when you are approaching them. So how does that sound? Is everyone happy with that? Yep. Great. And feel free to put questions in the chat as I go through, and also please just yell out any questions you've got as well. So let me just share my screen. And actually, before I do that, what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and what my history is. My background stems right back when I was a wee little girl and I met Jane Vandermeer as part of working for Bloom Fabrics, which was our family business. So it's amazing how paths cross, and it's quite insane actually. So I spent 15 years in the fabric and fashion industry from a very early age. I took on a family business and I watched the ebbs and flows of that family business and was very much entrenched as a part of that. We were wholesale and retail. We specialised in wholesale and retail ladies' dress fabrics with a real niche of bridal, after 5 and evening wear. And we had the most beautiful fabrics available in Australia and sometimes around the world. We used to import from all over the world, and we sold nationally into New Zealand, and started exporting actually just before I decided to close the business. And so that gave me an incredible lens, and I probably didn't even realize it at the time, but it gave me an incredible lens to become a generalist across business, because I learned importing, wholesaling, retailing, exporting, admin, marketing, social media didn't exist back then, but this was really when websites just started coming out. So it was very much a generalist position. And so from there, I had a number of for want of a better word, my family was impacted very sadly with cancer. My mum died of cancer, and firstly, my brother-in-law. So within 3 years, our family had lost 2 family members to cancer. And they were both very young family members as well. And at the time that mum passed away, my children were 6 months old and 2. And I needed help. I was running this business, and I realized, there really has to be more to this than just fashion, right? And I thought, well, lots of people can do fashion, not as well as Jane does though. But, I really needed to find my passion and purpose. Anyway, long story short, I moved into palliative care for quite some time, worked for Cure Cancer Australia for a while, and then went into, and through that time, I'd always started businesses and learnt from each time I started something new. Until I did the very last one, the most recent one, which was called the Helping Hub. And that was very much I feel like I paid for my own entrepreneurship or masters of entrepreneurship, because it was a very, very expensive journey for me. But the most incredible learning through that journey as well. And so through that time, and this was I started in 2018. And through that time, I really entrenched myself into the startup ecosystem in Victoria, as well as across other states, but most predominantly Victoria, and really grew an incredible network and community, which has seen me through to where I am today, which is, really exciting, and I'm really grateful for. And some of the women on this call are part of that network as well, which is really beautiful. And so once I actually had a conversation with a woman I didn't know very well. I didn't know at all. I met her that day. but she was referred to me, and she sat me down and she actually said to me, Jacqui, what are you doing? You know, let's have a look at these numbers. And I sat back and I realized, you know what, she's right. She asked me lots of questions about the startup itself and, you know, in lots of the early stage investment lingo, which I won't sort of delve into right now, but lots of lingo. Where are you at? Why are you doing this? What's your competition? You know, and I was sitting there going, well, I'm going to be the next unicorn, right? Because that's what everyone wants to be. And I can do this better, or I can do it differently. And I don't have competitors, like they're just indirect competitors. What's the big deal? And I then, you know, learnt so much more in that conversation. But really, I realized it was time to actually put it on pause and take my learnings and then be able to offer those very much as a mentor and advisor. So I then turned to the other side from the investment perspective and was offered a role with an early stage investment company where we then developed the opportunity and the we were very much values aligned in terms of wanting to help female founders, because along that journey, of course, I came across so many amazing women who, you know, I was part of the SBE program. I had done a number of other courses and programs, and there are so many women out there complaining, obviously, about the funding gap, but also very frustrated by it. And that's when I really started looking at the stats and just went, you know what, these stats are ridiculous. There isn't enough funding for female founders, and how can I help? And so that's where we started Shepreneur, and Shepreneur ran for nearly 12 months. And again, had an exceptional pipeline, was a really exciting startup that I'd been involved with, and looking at raising funds and capital, not just for Shepreneur itself, but for those coming through Shepreneur from an advisory and mentor perspective. Unfortunately, and very frustratingly, that ended up being a very frustrating business partner or business breakup with my business partner. And again, I no need to go into details other than yet another incredible lesson learned that I could never have paid for. You know, you wouldn't throw money at it to learn that lesson, no. But it cost me a fortune in so many ways. So it's so interesting. But Jules, you were going to ask something.
Well, I was going to say that for me, what some of the value out of that is that you did have a whole lot of blokes behind it who were funding that. And I'm really interested as we go on to find out what really makes them tick and what they and you know, this is kind of closed shop. So it's fairly safe. It's the recording's only going to go into the members, but I would be very interested to know really what it is that motivates them and what they're looking for, because I don't know that it's all the stuff that they say on the surface.
Probably not, and I'm happy to share. So through that process, I did raise $500,000 in a very short thanks, in a very short space of time as well. Within, you know, sort of 3 or 4 months, over a period of 3 or 4 months, I raised $500,000, which was exciting. And then so that has then led me to where I am now. So I'm now the Growth and Investment Director for Startup Bootcamp Australia, which is a very exciting role for me because it ticks all of my boxes and all of my niches. So it's very values aligned. It's about helping early stage startups. It's about accelerating them, offering them mentor and advice through our accelerator programs, which we run at Startup Bootcamp. And there are conversations around, you know, potentially doing one for female founders as well, but that's, you know, still just in conversation, and it's a little bit of watch this space. But at the moment, my role is very much about growing the name of Startup Bootcamp in Australia. We are a global company, but Australia started later than the rest of the world. It actually originally started in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands. Trevor Townsend and Richard Selm are the founders of Startup Bootcamp Australia, and we have a fantastic, really awesome team, executive team behind us, or together, and we do exactly that. We accelerate early stage startups. We have 4 main key focus areas, being food and agriculture, energy. So we run 3 different energy programs, sports and events tech, and sustainable fintech. So right now, my focus is also raising funds for our sustainable fintech fund, and that will be the next fund that we do over the next 7 years. But it'll cover 3 programs. So that's where that's me. That's my focus. That's what I'm all about. But you know, my love, and I'm very, very values driven around actually being able to help. And so my first question at the end of a conversation will always be, how can I help? And is there anything that I can do to add value for you? So are there any questions so far? No? Okay, great. So let me go into a little bit about the investment process and what I believe people are looking for, and what I look for when we have startups approaching us for investment as well.
Can I just also jump in, just because I know most of the majority of the women within She's the Boss have been running businesses for more than 5 years. I'm looking at all of these women and they're pretty much sitting in that space too. So really interested to hear about startups, because we're always, as entrepreneurs, thinking about new businesses, but also how as an established business, you might be able to get your hands on some, especially if you haven't had any funding before.
Yep. So, and this is a really, it's a great opening question, Jules, actually, because there is a significant difference between running a business and being a small to medium-sized business versus what investors in the VC space consider a startup or an early stage startup. Yeah. So a small to medium business can really be anyone who opens up a business who is actually trading more than $70,000 a year when it's no longer a hobby and it starts to become a business. And just bear in mind also, full disclaimer, everything I say here is purely for information only, and I am not providing any financial advice or services right now. Had to get that out because I often forget to, but
yeah, no, I think that was
full disclaimer.
But it's just a chat.
Thank you. So furthering from that, a startup, and particularly around the investment space, and I think what really, there's a few key themes that make it quite different, but the number one would actually be, how big is this company going to be? And how big is this company going to be from a financial perspective? And that's going to make the difference between the type of investor that you attract into your business, but also the amount of money that you're going to need to attract and the stages that you attract it as well. And I'll go through that a bit more. So hi, Emma, welcome. So having said that, when you're thinking about, or when investors are thinking about early stage investment, they're typically going to need to look at a minimum of 100 mil plus return of revenue generation or recurring income, recurring, what they call IRR or ARR, which is annual recurring revenue.
So 100 million return annually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, or 100 mil and an exit of 100 mil plus.
Okay.
So the reason being,
can you say that again? That look. Can you just repeat that? We're talking what you mean by that.
Remember, we're talking VCs here, which do look for a very high return, and they don't like investing anything under sort of. Well, sorry, off you go, Jacqui.
So, and so this is what, and this is where I think a lot of people, both men and women, get quite disorientated in this space, because when we're talking about investment capital from a venture capital organization or perhaps a family office, which is where, you know, there's money that's been coming through the ranks over many years, or through numerous generations, multiple generations, and we're talking multiple millions, if not billions of dollars.
So you're talking about the corpus that they have to invest in things. Is that what you're talking about?
No, well, not necessarily. No. So there are distinctly very different investment thesis depending on who's going to invest in your company. So if you are running a small to medium-sized business and say turning over an annual return of maybe $3 million, right? And you only need $1 or $2 million, or in fact, that's a lot of money even for a small business. But if you're only looking to grow, say, to get your next 3 shipments for the next 3 years, if you're a product, or to do your marketing and sales and marketing for the next 12 months. If you're looking specifically for that type of funding, that's not really considered investment funding from a startup perspective. Does that make sense? Right. So that in those instances, you may be better off with a loan, or it could be an investment or a loan from someone who is either family or friend, or one angel investor who loves you and loves the idea of your business and just wants to help out. But bear in mind, the number one, that there are many reasons why investors invest across angels, family offices, venture capital organizations, corporates. There are many, many reasons why. But the number one has to be a return on their investment, right? They're in it to make money, full stop. So if they cannot see from financials that there is going to be a return on their investment, then there's not going to be an investment made. So that's the very first learning, I guess, or lesson.
Oh,
yeah.
Karen's got a question there.
Karen?
Yeah, that obviously does not apply to impact investors. They want a return on investment, but they also have the importance of values and impact. So they're willing to take a lesser return depending on where they sit on the spectrum of impact investments, whether they only care about impact or whether they actually care of having a return.
So, and that was then going to be the next part. So number one is, and you mentioned this in what you just said, they're still looking for a return, right? I have not come across an impact investor, any kind of investor other than potentially family or friends, who aren't first and foremost looking for a return on their investment. Then the next thing is that they're looking for a values alignment. So their values will have to be, or not have to be, but more often than not, 90% or more will be looking for a values alignment or an alignment with what they are interested in doing. Right. So Karen, as you said, impact investors, absolutely. They're looking to make an impact. And one of their values of return on investment is the impact side of it. Having said that, they would still be looking, particularly if it's a fund, they would still be looking for a return on that investment, because they've got investors that they have to return that money to with interest paid, or with a revenue, with a return. A higher dividend.
So Jacqui, can we just talk about some of the other kinds of investments as well? Because I think maybe if we start, so VC is really 5 million plus if you're kind of looking at that.
No, not necessarily. VC can start at, some VCs will write a check for $100,000, right? At a very, very, very early stage.
But not expect to get $100 million return out of their 100,000.
Not out of the 100,000, but over the lens. So the general rule of thumb is they're looking for a 3 to 5 times return on their investment over or within a 5 to 10 year period.
All right.
Right. So 3 to 5 times return on 100K, might be 300, anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000 return on that 100,000.
Okay, that's
which is why I'm saying the business would have to be making, you then look at the multiples of that, and what does the business need to be making to generate that kind of return, and that's a return for one investor.
Yeah.
All right. So if they've got multiple investors on their cap table, they're going to be looking for, you're going to need to be generating $100 million company plus in order to return across multiple investors, depending on how much they've invested.
Do you think that's one of the challenges with women, is that we don't think as far as 100 million in a lot of instances?
It's not just with women, Jules. It's with most startups.
But why are the VCs 98% of funding going to the men? So the women, there's something that we're not gelling with.
There's more bias. The biggest downfall I see when I see pitch decks come through is they haven't thought through, the founder hasn't necessarily, and this is particularly at an early stage, right? When we're talking Series A and beyond. So does everyone understand that the difference between early stage, so going from going from the funding rounds?
Let's assume we don't. Why don't you just explain?
So assuming we don't, when you're looking for investment, you would generally start what we call FFF, family, friends, or fools. So, and I like to throw the fools in there, but it's typically family and friends. That is usually your first round, and it usually is what we call pre-seed. So when you haven't yet, you need the money to get the idea off the ground. Okay, and that's usually at the idea stage. Some people have already put their own money in, and so they are already either at that stage where they're starting to generate either interest, or they might be generating revenue, a little bit of revenue, or they might still be playing with their MVP, which is their minimum viable product. At that stage, they then might be saying to family and friends, hey, I've got this amazing drink bottle. This is a prototype. I need X amount of dollars to put my first order in. And so family and friends might come in. Then they might sell that first order. They get traction. Once they've got traction, they will then go and raise funds to go and then sell that drink bottle or manufacture that drink bottle offshore, and maybe then sell it globally. And I'm talking, that's a very fast trajectory, right? That obviously is not going to happen in that context, but to put some context around the conversation. So, or you're a tech company and you've started with a very, very basic website that you're playing with. You're validating the idea by asking lots of questions, getting lots of feedback, testing it with your market, testing it with your friends, your family, what have you. At that point in time, if you don't have the funds to put into it, you need to be, what you're then doing is selling the idea. You're selling the dream. Okay. And typically 1 in 10 or 90% of startups fail. And that's a true figure. All right. So it is a very, very, very high risk investment. However, of those 10, let's say you did invest in 10 or 20 investments. Of those, 10 or 12 of them might fail. Usually, maybe 3 or 4 of those might have an exit somewhere between a very short, they might make a little bit of money. So they might have an exit between 50 and 100 mil or less, under 100 mil as an exit. So you've made a little bit of money, but maybe not heaps. And then you may have one that is an absolute moonshot that has a 500 or 600 mil exit or becomes a unicorn. All right. But the chances and the likelihood is quite slim. Having said that, as the ecosystem matures and grows and continues to mature, there comes a time where there's a lot more founders who come back and become return founders. So they've learnt the lessons over time and they come back and they reiterate the process. You also have investors who become smarter at how they're investing, and you have programs, mentors, advisors who have also then had the experience to come back and bring back into the ecosystem. So the ecosystem in Australia is still very immature and quite young. If you compare that to what's happening out in the US or in parts of Europe, they have a much more mature ecosystem than what we do here. And so you will see a lot more unicorns, particularly come out of the US or offshore. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's just one. So coming back to the question of, coming back to the seed round. So you then have seed round. So you've got your proof of concept. Now at this point, at your seed round, you may attract investment from, say, a Blackbird or a very high VC venture capital organization. However, at that point, they would be looking at an idea that generally doesn't exist, or typically doesn't exist, right? It has to be a really unique idea. So someone like an Uber or a Canva, where the idea hasn't yet hit the market, or there's very, very little competition, or the market size that they can penetrate is multiple billions, right? So it's a massive, massive market opportunity. That's where you attract the really big numbers and the big players.
But would they do that in a seed funding round?
Some do, yes.
Right.
Yeah, some do. So there's a few different verticals here. So one is the idea and the type of idea, what's surrounding the idea. So the size of the market, the competition, and the founder, right? So the last one is the founder. And typically at that point in time, the founder is probably the number one focus, because you're really looking for a founder who can be coachable, who is open to taking feedback, who is open to constructive feedback, who is open to learning, and who doesn't profess to know it all. But they also have to be tenacious, because being a founder is a bloody hard job. It's a long road. It's a really difficult process. I can see Emma smiling there. You must be a founder. Okay.
You've been down this road, I think.
All right. It's a really difficult process. And you know what? It's a marathon. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you need to have that resilience. So they're the three key ingredients for investment at very early stage. Then what happens is that can be both pre-seed and seed round. Typically at seed round or those rounds is where you would first go out and talk to angel investors. And to find the right angel investors for your business, and this is the same not just for angel investors, but for family offices and for venture capital firms, they often have themes or industry scenarios or industries that they are very interested in. Or, as Karen mentioned before, that they are values aligned with. And the last thing that you want to do as a founder is bring someone on who knows a great deal about getting a product to market, but you're starting a sex tech platform, for want of a better example. Like you have a right as a founder, and this is probably one of the bigger reasons why I think one of the reasons there's a gender bias, and there are many reasons, but this is just one, is that women don't always have the confidence, A, to say no, but B, to choose who their investors are. And that comes down to self-confidence and worthiness. Right. So a lot of women will say, oh, they're giving me the money, so I better just take it, because who else is going to give me that money?
Yep, right.
And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of stories of people taking investment and from the wrong investor. Right. So it's really, really important that when you are taking investment, that you take it from or you accept it from an investor who is going to add value, particularly in the early stage, who's going to add value to your business. Because you're strapped for cash, you're strapped for time, you're strapped for knowledge, You can only offer so much. But when an investor comes in, they can not only offer you money, but they can offer you expertise and knowledge and their network. So the last thing you want to do is bring on the wrong investor for your business. The other thing I like to also liken investment to is it's a marriage. It's a relationship, right? You are in this relationship for at least 5 to 10 years, because that is likely going to be how long these people are going to be part of your business, right? Unless, and that's, I can't even think of an exception to the rule unless there's, you know, a company that's completely moonshotted and reached for the stars within 2 to 3 years. But it's highly unlikely. If there is, it's like 1 in a billion that happens.
So just assume you're going to be in bed with them for the next 5
So
years.
assume you're going to be in bed with them for at least 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think it's probably also worth mentioning. I don't know if you mentioned it because I had to step out. I had the heating fixed guy come in.
Okay.
The fact that the investor will usually want equity when they give you money, which means it dilutes what you own, which means you've got to be really careful how much you're willing to give up of what you own, particularly if you've got multiple investors and suddenly you only have a very small size of the pie.
Yeah, absolutely. So that then lends itself to, you know, the next stage. So if I'll just finish off on the rounds and the investment size, and then we can talk about the cap table. But so the rounds and the investment size are, as Karen says, very important at this stage, because once you've got the idea has been validated, you've got you starting to get traction and you're really starting to generate revenue. That's where your investors and typically your higher investors will start getting really interested. But they'll have been following you usually very early on in the journey. The thing about that also is what I wanted to say is, so when looking for your angel investors and any investment, do your research. Have a look at who they already invest with or into. Have a look at and speak to other founders that they have invested with. Ask those founders, what is that investor like to work with? How have they contributed to the growth of your business? Are their networks who they say they are? Can they make the introductions you need them to make, right? There's nothing wrong with going and validating who that investor is. And there will be some investors who are quite typically egocentric, for want of a better word. You are working with a lot of ego here. So, you know, they might take offense to that. And if they do, you don't need their money. Yeah, it's really difficult. But the one thing that I have learned is that there are incredible men out there who want to help women on this journey. Right? They don't agree with the gender bias gap. They don't agree with the funding gap, and they do want to make a difference. So that's one side. And so then you go seed. It goes seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, up to the, you know, beyond. And typically at Series A and Series B, they're much bigger rounds. So you're talking about you know, millions of dollars at that point in time. Wait, what did Jenny say?
She said there are very few that aren't fig jams.
There are a few that aren't fig jams.
Does everybody know?
Exactly, right? That's where we're talking about ego. Right, and that is another reason why it puts women off, right? Because a lot of women either don't know how to work with ego or don't like working with ego, don't understand how to navigate it. And that is a reason why the gender bias exists, or the capital bias exists, because typically and previously women in the investment space are few and far between in terms of actually handing the money out. So it has very much been a male-centric or male-dominated industry for many, many years. And that's only just starting to change now, but we've got a long way to go.
There's a shocking stat that Irene Zhang from Lift Women, who runs a crowdfunding platform, has, which blew me away, that said that 65% of investors prefer to hear a pitch from a male voice.
Yeah, they do. And I've actually got that stat on.
So if anyone wants to rent me out, I'm very happy to pitch for people.
Yeah. It's really interesting that there's just, but that's also because that, 14%, only 14% of women sit in investment space,
Well, hopefully that is changing.
Firms and sit at the chair actually taking investment on.
Yeah.
So, when you're only working with 14%, that's not many women to pitch to. You are generally going to be pitching to men for now, but that is changing over time.
Yeah.
So they're the key things to start with, is know who you're approaching and do the research on who you would like to bring into your company. Understand how much they would be willing to invest and how much equity that they would be looking for, right? And as Karen said, so then we go on to the equity side of things, and this is one other reason why there is a gap as well, why there is a funding gap, and that is women take a lot longer to give up equity. They are more risk averse than men, so they won't jump in as quickly, and they have, and in terms of being risk averse, they tend to be quite fearful of giving up that equity, whereas men do tend to take more risks, and so they will give up more, they will give up some of the equity. When you're talking about equity and giving that up, the other piece of advice is get proper legal advice around the cap table and the structuring of your cap table very, very early on, right? Because that is where you can make the really big mistakes. If you start structuring deals and giving up equity without having your capital table well thought out first, against the numbers that you're planning to be, being a multi-million-dollar company in years to come, then that's where it does happen, as Karen said, that you become more and more diluted as you raise more and more money, or with each round that you go and raise for. So based on that, it's really important, and people like Cake Equity do a great job, right? They're simple to use. They're pretty well efficient with their financials as well, with what they charge, and they streamline the process for you. So, and I'm not working for Cake Equity, but I do really like. I think they have a great structure.
I've never heard of them.
Of Cake Equity.
No.
Okay, great structure for cap tables. They have a ton of free information on their website. So if you want to learn about cap tables, go and check out their website. It's really, really simple, and they make the process straightforward. But if if it's not someone you want to use, go get some other legal advice around your cap table and make sure it's structured from day one, or as early as you can. And then what I do say though, in this instance, and I was that founder who just went, well, I don't want to take on investment because why should I give up something that I don't have, or why should I give up something that's going to be worth multiple millions of dollars in time to come? And I didn't really understand the value of the investment process at that point in time. But if you think about it, if you give up, let's say you give up 10%, 90% of something is going to be worth a lot more to you than 100% of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to continue that focus. And even if you eventually get diluted to 52%, if you want to maintain control, and we're talking, this might be 8 years down the track, 10 years down the track or more. At that point in time, you would assume that if you're owning, you're still 52% shareholder, in 8 to 10 years time, you've gone and raised millions of dollars, you would be a multi-million dollar company. you would assume there are exceptions to every single rule and to every single thing that I'm saying here, right? So that's why I take it with a grain of salt, but take it as information to work with rather than as pure advice. But yeah, because you may have that company that's going to change the world, or that's going to make a world of difference that will be $1 billion company. But if you're not, that's okay too. And one of the things I do like to question startups or founders when they first come and chat to me is, my very first question is, why do you want to raise? Why do you need to raise? Do you have to raise? How long can you hold on to it for? And bootstrap it or fund it yourself before you need to bring that investment in, because you have to return that investment at some point, and not only return it, you need to return it
multiple
times. And if you don't, you're still giving up equity as well. So there's a lot to consider. Getting investment sounds really sexy, and it's become a real buzzword, I think, anyway, within the startup ecosystem, but certainly in Australia and Victoria and Sydney and Gold Coast. And I just question or caution whether enough founders put enough time into thinking about, do they need the investment right now?
But if you haven't got friends and family with money, where else is there? So there's angel investors.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are your thoughts around sort of philanthropic kind of organizations that are very impact based, I guess? So I'm thinking of the Marindaroo, whatever it is, there's some, so there's the Pratt family, and there's various others that will put money into things if it's around women or if it's around Indigenous or whatever. Is that a viable option, do you think?
Yes, they will, but it has to fit their mandate, right? So it has to be values aligned. And if you consider how many hundreds, if not thousands of pitches they receive every single year across their desk, what is it that's going to make you stand out, right? What is it that's really going to appeal? And so that's where you need to find what is their sweet spot with investment funding, right? With the Pratt family, why do they? I mean, they invest a lot into artwork and galleries and what have you.
No, but they're also into recycled, I think, because of Visy or that kind of arm of it.
100%. But I'm just using that as an example, right? And that's because Jane is very much focused and is very values aligned around artists and helping artists grow. So I'm using that as an example to show, when you find the right investor who is values aligned, they tend to be a lot more open to the conversation, and to hearing, what you're looking for, and to open up the next stage, and then B, your returns do need to bring something in, because not so much for foundations, but certainly for VCs, for VC firms, they're investing typically on behalf of other people, right? So they've got other people's money that they're investing. So they have actually an onus to their investors to bring a return. And so, there's a difference of looking at a family office that's a small run family office or private equity firm versus a public venture capital firm. You need to be a charity, so they
so they get the tax deduction.
No, not necessarily. So it depends if you're running an ESV CLP. If you're running if there's a fund that's an early stage venture capital limited partnership, which is when 80% of the investment stays in Australia, is when there are tax benefits. But either way, there are still capital gains benefits.
Great.
Jenny, did you want to say something? I mean, you've got 35 years experience in the
Well, I think
industry.
Emma's
You can probably add a lot more to that than I can.
And
in
Emma's
my
had her
experience,
hand up.
in my experience, most of them are set up as PAFs, private ancillary funds, and under the rules and regulations, they can only make investments or do finance and funding and donations and that type of thing to charities. So, and they won't. And the reality is, you can sort of say to them, give me $1 million and I'll give you a 50% tax deduction and give you back 500,000 straight away now, and you can invest 500,000 and still end up with the same outcome. But they will only.
Is that with a family? Is that with a foundation though?
Yeah. The private ancillary funds are generally family offices and that type of thing, and they're usually administered by either equity trustees or perpetual, and they represent about 75% of the private grants and funding that are available, and they're only allowed to give funding to organisations that are actually charities and like have DGR1 status.
Right. They may, and then on the other hand, they may also have other vehicles set up so that they can
depends
do
on their structure, but yeah, the majority of them don't go that path.
Yeah.
That sounds
Emma.
like a fabulous loophole.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Anthony's wing, as the guy here, but he's listening in. We've gone through both trying to get social impact investment for one of our companies, and we've also looked at philanthropic foundations. It is as Jules well knows, a Dropbox for children in out-of-home care, and it's widely Australia and the UK now. We're going into the US, so it's the only, we don't have any competition, which is great. But social impact, we contacted every social impact investor in Australia, and I kid you not, with the exception of one, which is she's now moved from Eleanor to Flying Fox, and she's a wonderful lady, and I'm sure you know her, but they all said no, we want a 10x return, and we can't see any additional need for funding rounds. Yes, we love your social impact, but no, we don't have funds for you. And that was everyone we spoke to. Then we got in contact with, we were actually sort of shortlisted for funding through the Gandel Foundation and a wide range of others. Again, we had to auspice with the DGR1 to try to get that funding, and they just don't. They're very, very specific on what they'll fund. Even though there was a big impact for Indigenous children, no opportunity for us. It's a really, really difficult thing.
And at the moment, probably 90% of their focus is COVID recovery. And bushfires originally, that sort of a few years ago, it was bushfires that moved to COVID recovery, and now you can just see the next natural disaster with the floods.
So where does that leave you to though? Where do you, I mean, because are you going to turn,
we keep funding it ourselves, and
because you're not going to make that 100 million potential possible.
I mean,
you're not going to be able to do VC either.
Well, one of the investors actually said to us, it's a great idea, and this company will, you're starting to make some really good money. They said, this is just going to give you dividends, but it's not going to give you, multiple 10-time returns.
And they're looking for $1 billion exit. That's what they've said to us, even for social impact.
Yeah. Is that the same? Have you with Giant Leap? Did you?
Yes, we spoke. Yeah, we actually went and had a chat with Giant Leap. This was just before COVID. Yeah.
They actually have an event tomorrow night I'm going to at Docklands if you want to, which is about getting into India, because one of the speakers is my business partner in Handle Your Own PR. So come to that with me. I'll send you the link now.
Probably a big leap for us in social welfare, to be honest.
I'm happy to take a convo offline. There might be some investors. I mean, I can have a look at your deck and just have a think about, other ways around it.
Yeah. You're going
just
to
remember Canva got told no 100 times before they raised.
Yep.
You're going to the startup function tonight, aren't you, Jacqui?
I am. I'm on the panel. Well, come and grab me afterwards, and give me a bit more I'll ask a few more questions and give me a bit more context around it. But there might be a couple who are interested that you may not know of.
I did actually, Jacqui, just take the opportunity to invite her to lunch with us on Friday if she wants to have a chat with you as well.
Okay, sure.
And Deb Carroll. You know, I can't help myself.
You're hilarious.
Okay, keep going. We've only got 20 minutes, so
we've got 20 minutes. All right, so
this is wonderful, by the way.
Sorry.
This is wonderful. It's really
great.
Good.
I've kind of covered the what are they looking for. I'm curious to hear. Sorry, I'm because I don't want to go. I'm just having a quick look through my slides because I don't want to talk too much about. Okay, I'm going to present this slide.
Yeah, great.
And I don't want to talk too much about the gender bias now and the funding gap because it really is a whole nother presentation. But this, what I like to, can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay. What I like to present, and one of the questions was, and I've probably covered this off a little bit, but you know, what is it? What are they looking for? What are investors looking for? And that's quite funny because I've probably covered some of this already. So I just call this my 6 T's. These are the 6 T's that you need to consider when you are looking for investment. And the first one is talk, right? Who are you talking to and how often? And this can be, again, if we take it back to the gender bias gap, there can be frustrations and limitations on how often women are out there talking. They tend not to, it's a bit of that, not the tall poppy syndrome, the, what do we call it? The imposter syndrome. They tend not to express what they're doing and why they're doing it as well as men do. And so that can be certainly one of the causes. Again, it comes down to ego, but it can be one of the causes or reasons why women don't get funded as well or as often as men. So how often are you talking to them? Are you pitching to VCs and angels who actually care about what you do? Are they interested in your product or your platform that you're building? Do they actually want to help solve the problem? And this is where I talked about find their sweet spot, because raising money does take time and it takes the same amount of energy regardless of the amount that you're raising. So you might be raising 50,000, you might be raising 50 million. You are still putting in time and energy that's taking away from your business and your startup. So you need to think about, be really clear on how much you're raising and why you're raising that money, and then who you're talking to about it. Team. And what is your team traction, right? So sometimes when startups are raising funds, they don't consider the money that they're going to need to actually increase their team size. And so often, firstly, when you're looking at, an investor will look at your team to start with and look at who you are, why you are the best person to actually bring this problem to life or to solve this problem and bring this solution to life. But on top of that, it's, as I said earlier, you can only do, a certain amount within the time that you've got. So therefore, if you say along your trajectory that you are going to get to a number of different inflection points, at those inflection points, you also need to be catering your funding to grow your team, because you can't possibly do it all yourself. So how quickly is will your team grow? What is your team traction? Are there salaries as part of your raise? No one should work for free. If you've got investors on there who want you to work for free, I say don't get in bed with them. That's like marrying someone who doesn't want to give you any money. Not that you should, have to marry someone for money, but you need to be supportive, right? The whole idea of getting investors on board is for the support as well. And if they're expecting you to make them wealthy with a 10x return but not pay you for your hard work, tell them to get stuffed, is my opinion. But make sure you allocate your funds to raise to grow the team, and show the projections on your timeline that this will happen. The next thing you want to talk about and want to make sure is that you have traction and you know what your traction is or how you're going to grow. So how an investor will look for your traction. So how quickly will you grow? How fast have you grown to this point? How long has it taken you to get from A to B? How much money have you burnt, or what we call churned, through that time? So you may have existed for 6 months and you may have churned $2 million. Okay, but can you justify it? Can you tell us how you did that and where did that money go? Because if you can't, then I'll be like, well, then you can't look after your funds, so why should I give you mine? Okay, so it's very important to understand your traction and how fast, what that burn rate is and how fast your churn is. So demonstrate your traction as quickly as possible. And this doesn't always have to be in revenue. It might be in customer acquisition. It might be in your tech build, but basically traction equals growth, equals revenue, equals returns. And that's what an investor will look for. Your timeline, what does your timeline look like? And is it realistic? Okay, so are your hires realistic versus your projected revenue? As I said, you can't do it all on your own. So who are you hiring and when are you going to hire them? When are the dollars going to kick in? What are your key inflection points? What's your timeline? Make sure it's realistic.
Jacqui,
yep.
Can I ask a question? What if you've had a business for 5 years or whatever?
Yep.
It's working, it's trundling along, it hasn't had investment, but you know that you could grow it with investment. Are they going to be interested in funding something that's 5 years old if you haven't managed to get the traction, or are they just going to go, nah, this is just a dud? I guess
it's really hard to, I suppose the difficulty, Jules, is it's really hard to answer that on everyone's behalf.
Yeah.
There may be investors out there and there certainly are investors out there who are happy to look at a slow burning company.
Yeah.
That is just ticking along, but has the opportunity to 3 or 4 times.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to distract you. I'm just interested about what if it's not a startup, but it's kind of acting like a startup because it hasn't had a cash injection.
Yeah, no, it's still very much, I would put that in the other category of not so much a startup, but very much a small to medium business. And depending on your revenue, where that fits, but typically a small business who's looking for an angel investor to come in and help grow it,
right,
and then to turn it over, flip it. Yeah, that's probably the type of investor I'd be looking for in that instance. And then we go through cap table, which I mentioned earlier. So how much are you willing to give away? What amount is negotiable for you? Don't take the money from anyone. So you can negotiate on amounts. It gets a little bit more difficult as you when you start asking for more money and bigger amounts. So when you're at the Series A or Series B round and you're certainly looking for multiple millions of dollars of investment, you do start losing some of that not just structure, but some of that control. So you need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row or everything in place to be able to negotiate and explain why you are keeping X amount on the cap table, what your role is. You need very defined roles. So what your role is versus what the investor's role is. Are they coming in to sit on your advisory board or be a board member? Often when you're at those greater raises, that typically there is going to be someone when they're handing over that much money, they want to know what's going on in your business, so they are going to want to sit on your cap table. As I said, smart money, so look for the investments that will provide impact in the business. And then so have a to-do list. Reach out to other platforms and I really like this one, reach out to other platforms that might be similar to yours who have already raised before you. And they don't have to necessarily be exactly the same type of company, but they might be in the same industry, but solving a different problem, right? So who did they go and raise from? Because typically, if they're in the same industry, you're going to be talking to the same investors. And can you get a warm intro to those investors? Run lean, but you don't need to starve. Okay, so there's no need to have starvation on the table. And lastly, don't undervalue yourself and don't undervalue the product that you're building. Okay, because that is very much a no. If you undervalue yourself and you show that in the conversations that you're having, you're less likely to get investment, because if you don't believe in yourself, why should the investor believe in you?
Nice. Wow, Jacqui, that has just been such an interesting session. Has anyone got any questions? We've got another 10 minutes, and I know that there are some very serious looking faces and people taking notes. Anybody want to ask Jacqui a question? I can't even see Jacqui. Are there any hands up?
I can't see any hands, but I guess I'd love to know, have I answered?
Oh, Jenny.
Jenny, go for it.
You mentioned the advisory board, and I'm just wondering the impact of actually having an advisory board. We, as some people on the call know, we've had an advisory board in place since May last year, despite the fact that I've started quite a few and worked with over 100 startups. And we recently advertised for an extra 2 to 3 members as a result of the phenomenal quality of people that we've got. We put 3 on that advisory board and then started a second advisory board focused purely on marketing and business development. And I'm just wondering, in terms, I think the advantage for us is we've now got some really diverse thinkers across 2 different advisory boards, but in terms of the contacts they bring and that type of thing, if you want to talk about having an advisory board going and doing cap raises and the impact that they can bring to the table, not only in terms of their general advice and expertise, but the contacts and that type of thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny, that's great input and great advice. And what tends to happen that I've come across is that some companies or some startups aren't necessarily ready for an advisory board, or they don't understand the value of having an advisory board, or they don't even know where to start and how to create an advisory board. So it's almost a whole nother topic, right? And a whole nother conversation. But I very much agree, advisory boards are absolutely helpful. Having said that, though, they can also be quite time consuming, and they can also be a distraction. So there is a sense of, at some point, understanding when is the right time to start an advisory board, and what type of people are you looking for at what point the business is at, if that makes sense.
Maybe we can let's do a learning table next year on advisory boards. I think that's a really good idea, because you don't need one of those to be cap raising, but you probably do to grow your business. Or it's a great advantage to growing your business, and how to manage them and what to do with them and what's involved and stuff. I'll put it on my little list.
Put it on your list. And Jenny, I reckon you should run it.
I was actually thinking, I'm apologizing, Jenny, that I didn't think of you for today. I'm very glad to have Jacqui here, but obviously you really know your stuff, and I didn't make that connection. So yeah, I'd love you to do that next year.
Well, thanks. You're ditching me already, Jules.
Yeah, you're gone.
Thanks.
That's it. Sorry, you've been superseded. No, I'm joking.
Lunch is over. Like, there's no lunch on Friday. Sorry.
I'll shout you. I'll shout you to get you there.
No, it's all good. Karen?
I just wanted to make a comment about this thing about a business running along for 5 years and just going there hunky-dory, but whether investors would consider it to be a dud. And I guess I wanted to make one comment, and this is what's happening with one of my clients. They've been plodding along quite happily in a social enterprise, and they're just still a little bit in the experimental phase, and things that work. Have realized that some aspects of the business don't work, and others that they're looking of ways to change that. So we reviewed their entire business model and came up with 3 different business models of which they could go and scale. And again, this is maybe what you might need to think about, Jules, is how could you change your, or how could you look at your business model and then think, what could you do different that would allow you to scale to then attract an investor? Because I think that has a lot to do with it. Because what's the reason you're plodding along? It might not necessarily be because you don't have a market or you don't have a reason to exist. There might be a million other reasons.
You're right. I was actually thinking of handling your own PR, which sadly is now 12 years, but I still got the same appeal and the same enormous market globally as it's always had. And I just was kind of throwing it in there to see, because there's always talk around funding for startups, but I just wondered, what if you've still got a good idea and it's on its knees because it needs cash injections, you know?
Well, there's also the other thing to consider, Jules, and this does go through the minds of investors as well, is why.
I know.
Why has it been plodding along, right? Why hasn't it, if it is such a great idea or such a great product or such a great, service offering, why hasn't it gone?
Well, that's why I think Karen answered that really well with the idea of actually maybe pulling in some consultants that would model different ways of running it. And then you've got something different and new, and it's almost like another startup kind of thing to then go to investors with. That's really clever. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Wow. Absolutely. So who's going to be the next unicorn? I'm guessing that Emma might be one. But I'm sure that there are others within our group. So,
but the question is, does she want to be?
Yeah.
Right.
Because
there's it's not all it's cracked up to be either. There's a shit. There's a lot of work involved in being that unicorn. So I'm not dissing being a unicorn, but at the same time, if you have to have the expectations that where your business is now and when you become a unicorn, they're going to be 2 different things. Yeah.
And also managing fast growth can kill a lot of businesses if they don't know how to do it. So not that, I mean, Emma is just she is just so brilliant. She's done so many different businesses. I mean, having done my interview with her, the woman doesn't know how not to be an entrepreneur, and she's got 2 absolute crackers at the moment. So
brilliant.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, who knows? But okay, so Jacqui, I just want to say thank you. This was great. Does everyone agree? I just thought this was so interesting and so useful, and I love it that you ditched the presentations, really, because I just think it was perfect that we could, hear your ideas and opinion. And obviously there's the disclaimer, this is not financial advice, this is just opinions and chat.
Yeah, but I'm only one person, right, in the space. There's someone else might listen.
You're very open and generous to share that information with us and tell us about your own journey, which has had its ups and downs, as every good entrepreneur has experienced. So thank you so much, and for taking time out of your day, because I know it's a slightly different scenario from when I asked you in January if you'd do it. But I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been an honor and very grateful to be invited. So thanks, Jules, and happy to share. If I can help one person get the next round of investment, then I feel like I've done a good job.
Yep. And if anyone wants an intro to Jacqui, they are very welcome to ask me, and I'll do you a warm intro. And Jacqui, otherwise, I'm crossing my fingers you can make it to our Christmas party. 13th of December, stick it in your diary.
Done.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you then. And I apologize for that glitch this morning. I found out that Kartra is down globally.
Wow.
So it's not just us who is in pain, but their notice on their thing says that it should be back within the hour. So hopefully it'll be done now. But I appreciate that you all had to jump through a few more hoops this morning to get here. Sorry for using your expression there, Karen. See you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.